Hi, gang. So I was just looking at the calendar. So I always like to do some housekeeping stuff before we begin. Your final paper is due the end of the month, the 28th. Please do have that to me. Also, I will say this. One of the reasons I put it so early is because I was planning to go to Europe for 2 weeks as soon as the semester was out. So I wanted to get your papers graded, obviously. I'm not going to Europe now, but still get your papers in so I can get those graded. I remind you that the college has offered credit, no credit, pass, fail option to students. So if you think that you need to do that, please do. There are a couple of you who have sent things late. I've not graded that. I'm going to work on that this week so I can get caught up on all of that. Also, a number of you have not signed up for a presentation slot. You need to let me know. So there's the two dates I put up were the 15th and 22nd. I can put up the 29th as an alternative, but I do have another class I need to get signed up as well. So I'm giving you guys the dibs between the 15th and 22nd. I don't think anybody signed up for the 22nd when I looked. But please do get signed up for that. You'll have about a 15-minute section. Really, your presentation is only about 5 minutes. I'll ask you a question or two. So when you sign up, you need to sign up for one of the slots. You need to tell me the the method by which we'll do our meeting so that you can do your presentation, whether it's Zoom. I actually prefer Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams. A couple of you have signed up for Microsoft Teams. I don't know that one very well, but I'll do it. We can do FaceTime. So you tell me which method you want to do when you sign up, and remind me of your topic so I can be prepared for that as well. So you got a final paper coming up. Look at your grades at this point. If you've been doing the discussion questions and the quizzes, then you're doing okay on your class participation. If you haven't been doing that, then you need to go back and catch up on that. I think I took off the deadlines for that. I had my reasons for wanting to have the deadlines, and I think that's good. Or I think I had good motive for that, but I'm not sure that that's actually working for everyone. So please do take some time to go back and do those quizzes. The answer will pop up there. They're not graded, but that gives me a record that you're actually participating in those. Also, same thing with the discussion. It's not graded, but it tells me that you would be participating in class. So do keep up on that. So we have 1, 2, 3, I think 4 more weeks. Let me double check that. I think we have 4 more weeks left in the semester. The one thing that I'm still kind of up in the air about, let's see, we're on April, so that's 1, 2, 3, 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks if you count the final exam review. So the one thing, so 4 weeks is what we have left. I'm not sure how I'm going to do the final exam. I'm having to get some thought to this because, I know how to do it. Otherwise, I'm getting the hang of this online and virtual classroom. But the one thing that I'm not really familiar with yet is how to do an exam that I feel like would be fair. So I'm still giving some thought to that. It still will be a vocabulary exam. It's not going to be. I'm not going to change that on you. I'm just not sure exactly how I'm going to do that. If clearly, if I had known, I would have made it some essay questions or something like that. But this is where we are as of right now. So I have to deal with it. So our topics for the remainder of the 4 weeks. So today we're going to talk a little bit about consumerism and what that means and how we're dealing with that. We got the economy right now to contend with that's not doing well. We've got payday lending to talk about today, and we've got the question of affluence and the wealth gap. So that's today. That will lead us next week into food, famine, and hunger. And so we'll look at that a little bit. Then we'll transition to just wars, civil disobedience, terrorism. Oh, payday lending is also one of our topics. Got to find my notes. I have my notes for consumerism and all the other. So I'll have to quickly look for my notes for payday lending. Oh, there they are. So we'll have payday lending we'll talk about today as well. And then we'll do food, famine, hunger. We'll do a section on just war, civil disobedience, terrorism, sanctuary cities, truth-telling, and journalistic integrity. Now, as I told you last week, the lectures are going to get shorter because my plan was to have you doing class presentations beginning now. Clearly, that's not working. But you will still be doing class presentations. You just won't be listening to everyone. So your lectures will get a little shorter, but I'll still be posting supplemental videos. I'll still be posting other things like that, the supplemental readings. I came across a really good one about Affluence today, supplemental reading that I'm going to post for you, things like that. All right, so let's get started. So when I say consumerism, I want to start, when I talk about this, I want to start with some questions, and clearly we can't discuss this in class the way I would want to, but the questions that I'd like you to think about as we approach this topic is how do you decide a product that you want to buy? What goes into your thinking when you want to buy a product? How do you make that decision? Is your decision influenced by online influencers? That's a thing now, you know. Of course, you guys know. But there are these influencers. There's also the subtle product placement in movies and things like that. Yeah, you get to see my Wegmans Lime seltzer here. You know, this product placement that's in movies, that's in online videos and things like that, and influencers who use products. So do those things influence you to use certain products, to buy certain products? Do you ever feel pressure, either from peers or society or anything like that, to purchase a particular product? How do you deal with that pressure? Do you just not even think about it? Do you just automatically succumb to the pressure? Do you read reviews or look at warnings or what other people have experienced with a particular product? I know especially when my wife and I, if we're going to buy an appliance, she's very good about this with cars, with the cars that she buys. When we go on vacations, we usually rent a flat or something like that. She's very good about reading the reviews. Me, not so much. I look at an apartment and I'm like, yeah, I like that, like the location. But she'll read it and she'll say, no, we don't want that. They have bad internet, or this, that, and the other. So, do you read reviews? Do you feel pressure? How do you make your decisions about the products that you buy? That's something that I'd begin the class by asking you to think about. For most of human history, we're talking really prehistoric times up until about 300 years ago, maybe even 200 years ago in some situations, people had no disposable income. By disposable income, I mean money that they could spend on crap like I have on the shoulder, over my shoulder back here, on just disposable income on clothes. Most people had maybe 2 suits of clothes, and that was what they wore, and they couldn't afford anything else. Most people had very few possessions at all. So, to have anything that was of value or worth, it was likely something that you inherited and maybe had been passed down in your family. In fact, your clothes It was not unusual in the world in which I grew up to wear hand-me-downs. I don't know if you've had that experience or not, but it was not unusual even in the day in which I grew up to wear hand-me-downs. I never liked doing it. My brother was shorter than me. He was older than me, but shorter than me. And so I never liked wearing hand-me-downs. But it was not unusual to do that for most of human history, no disposable income. By the time we reached the early 18th century, people's incomes began to grow. They began to have disposable income, so that there was an emerging middle class by the early 18th century, the 1700s. And as that middle class began to emerge and began to grow, the merchant class is sometimes what it was called. They began to have income that they could spend on other things to make their life a little bit easier, to make their lives a little bit more enjoyable, comfortable in some senses. And of course, by the time we got to the complete Industrial Revolution, and by the time we entered, especially into the mid 20th century, that was what it was all about. After World War II, the economy, and especially in the United States and other parts of the world, but especially in the United States is where we're kind of focused here, the economy was booming, and as a result, people had income that they could spend on things like microwaves, like automobiles, like more clothing, more shoes. It was not unusual for a person not to have a pair of shoes until they became an adult, or they were entering the adult world in some way. And the workaday world, not the adult world. You know what I meant. And so there became a shift then that it was not virtuous to be poor, to do without. In some sense, it became virtuous to be wealthy. It became the desirable thing to have wealth, to have that disposable income. And so that really led into what we know today as the consumer culture. And that consumer culture then leads to some ethical dilemmas and some issues that are important for us to consider when we're talking about contemporary moral and social issues. So I'll list a few of those and let you think about them, and just to kind of put them out there for you. Some of those have to do with legal liability. When you purchase a product, are you liable for how that product is used, or is the manufacturer then going to be responsible for how that product is used? I'm trying to remember if I think there was in particular, you could think about no, there's no. I was trying to remember if there was a section in the Boone book about that or not. There's not. But for example, when you purchase a car, you are required to purchase liability insurance and coverage on that automobile if you're going to drive it on the state roads. Now, from state to state, what you're required to purchase varies. But if you purchase a firearm, you're not required to purchase any type of insurance on that. But a firearm can kill someone just as easily, or maybe even in some cases even better, than an automobile. Why would you have to repurchase insurance for you to use one and not have to purchase insurance for you to use the other? How do we divvy up then that responsibility for who is liable for the products that we purchase? And that extends far beyond just guns and automobiles. We could look at that in other things as well. In some cases, the manufacturer will be entirely liable for the product if it malfunctions. I think about the hoverboards, which technically weren't hoverboards, that they were very popular about 2 years ago. If you'll remember, a number of them caught fire and injured people, and they had to pull them off the market. The manufacturer was ultimately responsible for that. So why was the manufacturer responsible? Whereas if there is a car malfunction, maybe the manufacturer is, maybe the manufacturer isn't. A few years ago, the Ford, what was it? Ford Explorers, they had a malfunction for which the manufacturers were responsible. So that's something that came about as a result of consumer culture. Of course, you go back to medieval times. If you had a crossbow, there was or a horse and a wagon, there was no liability for or no responsibility for the manufacturer or anything like that. There's also then, with the rise of consumer culture, there are government regulations. And this is what we put under the category of paternalism. The government then is allowed to step into some things and regulate exactly how they will be used and how they will be manufactured. So, for example, the cost of the product to produce versus the cost to the consumer can in some cases be regulated. Right now we're seeing shortages of things, but in many cases the government has said you're not allowed to price gouge. So you're not allowed to charge above a certain percentage of what the fair market value of something would be. So there are government regulations that are in play now. Also, you can't promote a product to people for which the results of that product or the outcome of that product have not been produced or have not been verified. Most recently, there have been promotions of products to prevent the coronavirus and the effects of it. So hydrochloroquine is one of those. And you might have heard the president touting the effects of that. The FDA and some other agencies and some doctors are saying not so quickly because we haven't proved that. We haven't done testing upon that. It might work, it might not. Same thing with some malaria drugs because malaria is a virus as well. So there have been some malaria drugs that have been promoted, and doctors are saying, well, maybe not. So that there are regulations. There was something else, the internet shock guy, talk radio, whatever he is, Alex Jones, was promoting, and there were some televangelists that were promoting some cures for the coronavirus or some preventative things for the coronavirus. And the government has stepped in and told them, you've got to cease and desist. And so in that, they're trying to protect the customer. Usually when government steps in, they are trying to protect the customer. And so you're not allowed then to experiment, or companies are not allowed to experiment on you with those products. So government regulation. The next thing to think about is product quality. What is the quality? And so there is then a trade-off that you have to think about, and it is an ethical issue, and it is an ethical dilemma. So, for example, I'll just give you a good example of my own life. So, a few years ago, I was driving a Volvo, but I was, for my real job, I was driving a lot of miles, 50 miles one way each day. So 100 miles plus every day. It depends on if I had to do any other running around. Minimally 100 miles a day. I realized that the Volvo was not the thing to drive because it was a large Volvo. And so I went out and I purchased a Volkswagen Jetta. I've been quite happy with the Jetta. I haven't had to put a lot of money into maintenance or anything like that, and I get good gas mileage with it, so I'm very happy. But the manufacturer of the Volkswagen Jetta is virtually the same as for the Audi. And just a couple of months ago, my wife went out and she bought an Audi, and she's quite happy with it. Frankly, I'm pretty happy when I get to drive it too. I've been driving it now because of the quarantine, because it needed to get out and get it moving. But they're essentially made by the same company. Now, for my Volkswagen Jetta, I know what I paid. It was a reasonable price. because I was going to be putting a lot of miles on it. I still put, 50, 60 miles a day on my Volkswagen Jetta, and it's fine for that. But she was willing, because she puts very few miles on her car when she has to go to work. She puts maybe 10 miles a day. She might put 60 miles a week on her car, and I do that in a day. So for her, quality of the product was worth it for the price. So she was able to purchase a more quality product for what she needed. I, on the other hand, purchased an inferior product for what I needed. So at what point do you have to weigh then the price versus the quality? And then also you have to look at the warranty that you're getting with the product. Not just the actual product warranty, but how long is this product going to last for your investment? And at what point is it worth the return on your investment to pay more for an automobile as opposed to pay less for the return on it? These are ethical issues too, because that enters into the price of the product that you purchase. There are some things I always spend more on because I know that I'm going to use them for longer. My everyday back and forth to the office bag, back and forth to class bag. A few years ago, I was willing to spend quite a bit for a hand-stitched leather messenger bag with distressed leather, because I knew that bag would only, in my opinion, look better, and it would last for as long as I needed it, and it would carry the things I needed it. And frankly, the bag has been around the world now with me a couple of times, and been all over the U.S. In the years that I've had it. I've been quite happy with it, even though I had to pay a great deal for it. So the quality versus the price, the warranty versus the price is something that we have to consider. And the manufacturer also has to think of that in terms of what the consumer is going to tolerate. That leads us into pricing. I've already alluded to price manipulation or price gouging, price fixing. There is the horizontal versus the vertical when it comes to price fixing. The horizontal is when the companies agree to a particular price for a product. The vertical is when the retailers agree to a particular price for a product. So vertical would be between the retailer and the customer. The horizontal would be the companies that manufacture that. And so there are ethical issues there. I'm not going to go into it. You can get into that. But then we also have to consider label and packaging. A product, so there again, we're protected by in some sense by the government. When products are labeled, they have to be labeled fairly and accurately. They can't claim to do something that they actually don't. But at the same time, it has to be something that entices the consumer to purchase the product. And same thing with packaging, that has to be safe to protect the product and also to protect the consumer to some extent. And then, of course, there are deceptive techniques that we see when we talk about consumerism and marketing to consumers. So there's ambiguity. This product will change your life in ways you never imagined. Well, if you use the product and your right arm is amputated as a result, yeah, it changed your life in a way you never imagined, especially if it was just supposed to be deodorant. Or there's concealment of facts about the product, so that they tell you that it's been tried and has had a success. But what about the 90% of the times that it was a failure? Is it right then for them to market that and conceal the results of that? Exaggeration of what the product can do. And of course, there's psychological manipulation of consumers when they purchase a product. A few other things that I'll just throw out here in consumerism before we move on to the next topic, which is payday lending. And that has to do with, for example, ads, marketing. And there are two ways that we have to think about those ads. On the one hand, ads directed to children. Is it right that those ads the ads are directed to children? You might remember as a child lots of ads directed at you. Even right now, sometimes you don't even realize it. In the age group most of you are in, there are ads directed to you to get you to purchase product. Same thing with me. The middle-aged man who's losing his hair, a little bit too heavy. There are ads that are definitely marketed to people and targeted to people. The other end of the spectrum from children is the elderly. And is it fair? Is it right to have consumer ads that are directed to children or directed to the elderly? That's something to consider when we're talking about advertising. Then there is the free speech and media. How much should they be allowed to say about a product? How far are they allowed to go with a product and what they say about it? If we have free speech, then why can't they say whatever they want to? Well, the answer is there are things that they can't say, just like you don't have absolute. None of our rights are absolute. Freedom of speech is not absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater and things like that. So there are things that you're not allowed to say when you market a product, even though you have the right of free speech. The final question that I'll raise for you when it comes to consumerism is ethical consumption. How much of the things that you have do you actually need? I mean, really, really, truly need. Is it right then that you have those things? I know I generally, for myself, I have a policy that when I purchase a pair of shoes and an old pair that I had, I will put, it might not be the most immediate old pair, but an old pair that I have, I generally try to put those aside to donate. So especially if they're still in good shape. I run a lot, so usually the uppers of my shoes are good. The soles might have a little wear and tear, but for some people, that would be perfectly fine for them to wear in a lot of circumstances. Same thing with my clothing. So I try to be a responsible consumer. I try not to buy a lot of products that affect the environment in ways. If I can purchase locally, for example, from a farmer's market or something like that, I do my best. And I'm not always a vegetarian, but I usually spend a lot of the year being a vegetarian, and lots of parts of the year being a vegetarian, because I know that consumption of meat can affect the environment. So there is this idea of ethical consumption. Being an ethical consumer, being an environmentally conscious consumer when it comes to the things that we buy. Let's see. Where's my... So now I want to talk about lending and usury. So here we're talking about issues of justice and equanimity and fair distribution of things. So I don't know how many of you have heard about payday lending, or I was surprised at my class last semester. Many of them had never heard of payday lending. I think it's legal in New Jersey, but I don't know how much we actually see it because it's kind of a seedy underbelly. But a payday lending establishment is where you can go in and you can prove that you're employed, usually by producing a couple of check stubs or something like that. And they will give you a loan against your next paycheck. Now, I'll be honest with you. There was a time in my life where I actually had to use that a couple of times to do an auto repair or something like that. Now, if you're disciplined and you can pay that back, that is great. Now, couple of the programs, the videos that I'm going to upload for you is going to show that, however, if you're not disciplined or if your income is not such that you can manage a loan, it's better to leave those alone and to do without, because you can get yourself into a very bad situations. Because payday loans can charge between 300 and 2,000% interest plus fees. So if you can imagine taking out a very small loan, and here's the reality. A study was published last year that said that most Americans, if they were presented with a $400 bill, they do not have adequate savings in order to pay that emergency bill. And that might be your situation. That might be your family situation. But that is an incredibly staggering, stunning statistic to contemplate, that most Americans could not handle a $400 emergency payment. We're seeing that right now with the effects of the pandemic. And that's why the government is rushing to get to people this $1,200 per person, so that they can, so that they'll be able to put food on the table and to be able to manage their life right now. And that's kind of staggering to think that most people can't. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of people are going to go out and they're going to take out these payday loans against their next paycheck. In some cases, they might not have a paycheck coming in. And so that loan is then going to roll over and the interest is going to accumulate and go up and up. And one of the videos I'm going to show you actually explains that situation. Somebody who lost their car because they had a health issue. They ultimately lost their car, so they couldn't get to work. They lost their job. And so the situation got dire. So some questions to think about when we talk about borrowing money. Is it okay to steal to pay your bills? Versus, is it okay to steal bread to feed your family? Is it okay to borrow money to buy bread? Is it okay for the bank to charge you interest if what you need is money to buy bread? Or is it okay for a bank to charge you 2,000% interest in order that you can feed your family? So that's what payday lending really does. It puts people in an incredible bind sometimes. And I encourage you to watch those videos about that, because there's more to it. But then something that's adjacent to that, an ethical topic that's adjacent to that, has to do with student loans. Now, let me tell you, when you have an undergraduate, 3 master's degrees, one of which is from an Ivy League, and a doctorate, you're going to accumulate student loans along the way. I was willing to take out those student loans. I knew what I was getting into. But let's face it, some people don't know what they're getting into when they take out student loans. And so then when it comes to student loans, I would encourage you to think carefully about the ethical implications of this. So right now, my student loans had accumulated for a few years because I continued to be in school. Fortunately, I was able to stay in school while I also worked full time, and I was able to adequately achieve a position and income that now I've started paying back my student loans. I'm going to have them paid off early. I'm paying more than the minimum. I'm paying the maximum plus. And so for me, I was actually able to work it out. Now, if I lose my job, for some reason, it's going to become very difficult. But as of right now, I'm able to manage that. But most people, especially if they take out student loans, if they have a starting salary, they're not going to be able to make their payments. And so often people have to put their student loans in deference or forbearance to be able to get themselves established. And the government only allows for about 3 years of forbearance before you actually have to start paying back those loans. And then at times they'll enter you into plans where it's income sensitive, or as your income increases, in other words, as your income increases, your payment will have to increase. Or they'll have other programs for you to begin to pay back. And some people are paying back student loans over 30 years. So think about that. There's an ethical dilemma there to be discussed and to be explored. Is the job you're going to get as a result of that loan going to provide you with adequate income to pay that loan back and be able to afford a place to live and an automobile and the lifestyle that you would want to enjoy? Are you willing then to sacrifice for 10 years to pay back that loan, paying the maximum amount every month for 10 years to pay off that loan? Are you willing to make those sacrifices? Because nowadays there are a lot of people who can't afford to have a house, a place to live, because they can't afford their student loan payments. There are other people who defer having children because they have their student loan payment. So those are things to think about. Is it really worth it? And I'm not trying to discourage you from pursuing your education. No, I encourage you to. I mean, I clearly believe in it, but there are ethical dilemmas to think about when it comes to how to pay for that. Is it worth slowing down your education so that you can pay for it as you go along in order not to incur loans or to incur far fewer loans, far less debt? And then there's the question to ask, if you're going to incur a loan that's going to be government backed, is it right then for the government to charge interest on that when really you're going to be contributing to the economy when you get out? And then there are questions about, should college be free? Our primary and secondary education is free. Should then college be free? Many Scandinavian countries, college is free. Some countries in Europe, college is free for everyone who wants it. Or what about technical schools, vocational schools? Should those be offered to more people as opposed to a college education? And then, of course, we have the whole problem of for-profit schools. They really do take advantage of people, for-profit schools, because sometimes they're not accredited. And when people leave those for-profit schools, they can't afford the loans, and they can't pay them back, and they can't find a job either because perhaps their degree was not accredited. So what is a higher education degree actually worth for you? Why are you actually pursuing a higher education degree? Is it just because your family encouraged you to, or is this something that you really want to do? I am a strong proponent of people maybe even taking a gap year before they go to college, because there's a lot of money wasted when people go to school. So there's some ethical things to think about there, and who benefits from that. So with that, I want to move on a little bit more to talk about, let's see, that was payday lending, student loans, consumerism, and now I want to begin to talk a little bit about affluence and the wealth gap that we have in this country. Excuse me. How much money does it take to actually make a person happy? How much do you need to make? Does the average person need to make to be a happy person, just on average? I wish this were class so that we could hear you talk about it. It turns out it's not millions of dollars. It's really not millions of dollars. For most people, the average income that will make most people happy is under $100,000. Between $75,000 to $80,000 will make most people happy. And so that's, for most people, that would be a reasonable income then, that where they could live comfortably, they could take a vacation every year, they could have a new car every few years, they could afford a modest house. So for most people, that's what it would be. And actually, studies have shown that if you increase your income far, far more above that, it really doesn't increase the level of happiness that you have. Now, certainly, we could imagine that if your income is well below that, if you're making $20, $30, $40, even $50,000 a year, that especially in a place like New Jersey, it could be difficult to live, especially to live with any level of comfort. So that then begs the question is, how should wealth be distributed? Is it fair that some people have so much wealth? And so if we were in class, I would ask you to fill in the blank here. Worldwide, the top 1% of people have what percentage of income? The top 1% of people worldwide have what percentage of the world's wealth as of 2018? The top 1% of people around the world have slightly over 50% of the world's wealth. The top 1% have slightly over 50% of the world's wealth as of 2018. That includes 19 million Americans who are in that category of the 1% around the world. 26, listen to me, 26 billionaires are worth more than half the planet. 26 billionaires are worth more than half the planet. So if the top 1% has 50, you could even take it down to something like the top 20%, and they would still have a vast majority of the wealth in the world. So that leaves then a 75-80% of the world that lives on a minuscule amount of wealth. It is projected that in the next probably 20 years, we will see, if not fewer years, we will see the first trillionaire in the world. Trillionaire. It'll probably be somebody like Jeff Bezos. I don't know. But is it fair then that income is distributed in that way? Should that money be redistributed to people at the bottom? Now, whether you like it or not, that's what is happening right now with the pandemic. People who are making households that make more than $175,000, $180,000 a year will not receive money with the new CARES Act. So it's only households that are below that. So according to the government, any household that makes $175,000, $180,000 a year is considered an affluent household or as an upper middle class household. And so they're not entitled then to that money. But if you think about it, in New Jersey, $175,000, especially if you're a family of three, a family of four, that's not a lot of money with the cost of living in a place like New York or New Jersey. Now, down where my family lives in the Deep South, hell, you can buy a house for $175,000, and it's a big, nice house. But not so here. So there's a disparity, and this is sometimes referred to as the wealth gap, or the wealth disparity, or wealth inequality. So how much is enough? That is an ethical question. And I would even go back and say, when you're thinking about your degree and you're thinking about your job, think about what you're going to make and how much is actually enough. There is a level of personal satisfaction that can go into that that is just as important to some extent as the amount of money. I'll give you myself and my wife as an example. My wife makes very good money. She's quite happy with her income. However, she hates her job. I shouldn't say hates. She's not as happy with her job. I love my job. I mean, I make good money. I'm comfortable, but I don't make nearly as much. But I'm quite satisfied overall with what I do. I really like what I do for my career. In fact, I think at some, on some level, I'll never retire from it. I'll continue to do this until I physically can't do it anymore. So for me, it's worth the trade-off. Not having the income that some people have, is worth it for me to have satisfaction in the career in which I do. And so, as we think about that, those are things that are ethical considerations. There is a trade-off then for that. And so we could ask the question, how much is enough? We can also ask, how much is too much? Is there such thing as too much money? Robert Reich has he has something that he said recently as a result of this pandemic. He was saying, we've seen that we need we've seen that we need nurses, we've seen that we need truck drivers, we've seen that we need people working in the grocery stores, we've seen we need teachers. The one thing that we've seen that we don't need are billionaires. So that's something to think about. Is there a level that is too much? And what is that level that is too much? And should there be a limit on the amount of money that a person can accumulate within a year? Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, raised the question recently when because most of he doesn't work for a living. Most of his money is from his income is from investments, and so the tax on the investments, the percentage of that he's taxed on his investments and the return on his investments, he pointed out, is less than the percentage of income tax that his secretary pays on hers. So he pays a lower percentage of income tax than his secretary does. Now, I don't know what his secretary makes, but that is a staggering thing to consider. And Warren Buffett has said that's not right. That's not fair. And so as we look at this wealth gap, this income gap that is growing, there are some reasons we have to think about and some questions we would need to ask. And I'm going to begin to wrap this up now. Things like technology. What part does technology play in leveling that field? Globalization. Certainly with this pandemic, we're seeing the trouble of globalization, but that's something to factor into this. Then there is the rise of what we call the super rich. There's the falling labor market as far as what is cherished or seen as important as labor. I dare say that there, just 6 months ago, we would have thought that a supermarket worker would not be an important laborer. And we see now that it is. The person who works in the supermarket is very important in the world in which we live, something that we could not have foreseen. So that means in some sense that everybody's labor is to be valued and should be rewarded in an appropriate way. And so in ethics, we ask that question: what is that appropriate way to reward someone for their labor? And then also we can ask, what is government's role in making the finances of people equal? So if we're going to have someone like Jeff Bezos, who might be a trillionaire in a few years, And, we say we don't want to begrudge him of that. But is it right then that he pays warehouse workers $12 or $15 an hour? Could he actually pay them $25, $30 an hour for a 40-hour work week so that they could really enjoy a better standard of living? Because when you do the math on it, on a 40-hour work week at $30 an hour, that's still, that's a good income. So let's just say that that's $1,200 a week. So if we multiply that times 4 weeks, or let's just say 52 weeks a year, that comes out to $62,400. By the time you take taxes out of that, now, of course, that person is probably going to get all of their taxes back. Something I want to say about that in just a moment. In truth, that person is still not reaching that level of income that gives that ultimate satisfaction that we were talking about just a moment ago at $75,000, $80,000 a year. But I decided I wanted to say something about that. I know some people think that it's great. So this is not an ethics. This doesn't have to do with ethics. This just has to do with a way to think about your personal finances. Just like I told you last week, don't use your work computer for dating or porn or anything like that. Here's another tip. You shouldn't want to get a refund when you file your taxes. That's not a good thing. That means the government has held your money for a year and they did not pay you interest. On the other hand, if you owe a small amount, as long as you're able to pay that, if you've saved your money, then you can pay that without interest or penalty, unless you're late filing your taxes and you owe. Then, of course, that is another issue. But my point is, getting a refund is not actually a good thing, whether it's state or federal refund. Now, some people aren't disciplined enough to save. That's the way you save, then that's fine. But it's your money. It's not the government giving you money back. It's your money. And the more that you can keep of that, the better off you would be in paying your bills and doing your own savings on a week-to-week basis. So finally, as we consider this wealth gap, we have to consider how to respond to poverty and what role then poverty has on race. Poverty, what does it? How does it play upon children, or prey upon children, if you will? And so think about, for an example, right now we know that the COVID-19, this virus, is certainly taking a greater toll on poor people and on minority people, and the elderly. And there's a simple reason for that. They have poor health care because they're poor. That's just the fact. Race plays a huge factor in the health care that people get because, generally speaking, minorities have lower income and therefore they have less insurance. They're less able to go to the doctor and take care of themselves. They're less able to afford the food that would keep them healthy and the other things. I mean, just think about it. You don't have to pay a lot of money to exercise, but think about the number of people who pay the gym fees to go somewhere like Lifetime. That's more than $100 a month to go to a gym. Well, $100 a month for some people is just prohibitive. Of course, you can go to other gyms that don't cost that much, but some people can't even afford that. And so even something as simple as exercise, of course, you don't have to have a gym to exercise, as I said, but even something as simple as exercise is out of the price range for some people. And then again, to think about children. In a lot of states nowadays, there's insurance programs for children to keep them covered and healthy. But what happens when they turn 18? If their parents did not have insurance, it's not like they can just go on their parents' insurance at that point. So those are some things to think about. How do we balance then the affluence that we say people are entitled to versus those who live at the margins of society when it comes to our income? And then one final thing that I'll just throw out there for you to think about is, how do you respond to the poor? How do you respond to strangers, for example, when they ask you for a donation or they ask you for a handout? How do you respond to them? What is the place of charity in your life? And are you morally obligated to be charitable toward people when they ask of you? You say, well, I don't have a lot, so how can I be morally obligated? That's a question that you have to answer for yourself. To me, because I feel like I've been very fortunate. I've been at situations where, a box of macaroni was about all that I could afford. Yes, I've been there. But I'm very fortunate right now. My wife and I are quite fortunate right now. And so what is the role of charity then in your life, and what responsibility do you have, even if you're poor, to be charitable toward others? All right, guys, gang, I'm going to wrap it up here with this. We're going to follow along from that next week, where we talk about food and famine and hunger, and what our responses are in situations like that. Sanctuary cities, we'll be talking about that soon. War, just war. What about civil disobedience and terrorism and things like that? So I'm going to post this. I'm going to get some supplemental videos up for you shortly, a couple of supplemental readings to you. It might not be today, but I'll have those up by tomorrow, along with a quiz for last week's material and some discussion questions for you to deal with. All right, gang, I appreciate it, and look forward to continuing our discussion next week. Trying to catch up on emails, so if you've emailed me, just transitioning everything has just been a lot of work. I had an 11-hour day yesterday, still didn't get everything done, still got a to-do list, and I've got meetings until about 9 o'clock tonight. So I'm doing my best to get to you with everything. Not an excuse, just telling you if I don't respond quickly, it's because my world is just as upside down as yours. So I'm trying to be understanding to you when you're having difficulty. All right, with that, gang, I'll say have a good day, and I'll see you in this format next week.